What if tomorrow morning every mosquito on Earth simply disappeared? At first, the answer seems obvious. No more itchy bites. No more sleepless nights spent listening for that familiar high-pitched buzz. No more malaria. No more dengue. No more yellow fever. Humanity would finally celebrate the disappearance of the deadliest animal in history. Or would it? For decades, we've been warned that even the smallest creatures can hold entire ecosystems together. Remove one thread, and the fabric of nature could begin to unravel. Millions of bats might lose a food source. Wetlands could change forever. Entire food webs might collapse in ways we never anticipated. It's a frightening idea, and one that has shaped public opinion for generations. But what if that story is only half true? Because behind closed laboratory doors, scientists have already developed genetic technologies capable of driving entire mosquito populations toward extinction. This is no longer science fiction. In some parts of the world, carefully engineered mosquitoes have already been released into the wild as real-world experiments. Which raises a question far more unsettling than whether we can eliminate mosquitoes. What if eliminating them wouldn't destroy nature at all? What if the greatest challenge isn't ecological, but moral? Because the moment humanity gains the power to decide which species should continue to exist, we cross a line that no civilization in history has ever crossed before. And before we decide whether mosquitoes deserve to disappear forever, we first need to understand why this tiny insect became the most successful killer our species has ever faced. To understand why some scientists are seriously discussing the deliberate extinction of mosquitoes, we first have to confront a remarkable fact. The world's most dangerous animal isn't a lion. It isn't a shark. It isn't a snake. In fact, it weighs less than a raindrop. Every year, mosquito-borne diseases kill hundreds of thousands of people and infect hundreds of millions more. Malaria alone continues to threaten nearly half of the world's population, while dengue, yellow fever, chikungunya, West Nile virus, and Zika repeatedly overwhelm healthcare systems across entire regions. Collectively, they have shaped human history in ways few other organisms ever have. Their influence reaches far beyond hospitals. Long before anyone understood what caused malaria, armies feared marshes more than enemy soldiers. Ancient commanders often avoided entire landscapes because disease could devastate an army before a single battle was fought. Centuries later, European colonists entering tropical regions encountered the same invisible enemy. Entire expeditions collapsed not because of poor planning or superior opposition, but because fever spread relentlessly through camps that seemed perfectly safe. One of the most famous examples came during the construction of the Panama Canal. In the late 19th century, France launched an ambitious effort to connect the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. The engineering challenge was immense, but it wasn't mountains or machinery that brought the project to its knees. Yellow fever and malaria swept through the workforce, killing thousands and forcing the project into failure. Only decades later, after scientists confirmed that mosquitoes were transmitting these diseases and large-scale mosquito control programs were introduced, did construction finally succeed under American leadership. History remembers the canal as an engineering triumph. Less often remembered is the tiny insect that nearly prevented it from ever existing. The battle between humans and mosquitoes has been so relentless that traces of it are written into our DNA. In parts of Africa, the Middle East, and South Asia, a genetic mutation known as the sickle cell trait became unusually common over thousands of years. Carrying 2 copies of the mutation can cause a serious blood disorder, but carrying a single copy provides significant protection against severe malaria. It is one of the clearest examples of natural selection still visible in modern humans. A reminder that one insect has influenced not only where civilizations developed, but even how our species evolved. And mosquitoes themselves are astonishingly sophisticated hunters. Only female mosquitoes bite because they require the proteins found in blood to produce eggs. Finding a host is not a matter of luck. It is the result of millions of years of evolutionary refinement. Long before you see one, it has already begun tracking you. It detects the carbon dioxide you exhale with every breath. It senses the heat radiating from your body. It recognizes moisture in the air, the unique chemical compounds released by your skin, and even visual contrast that helps it identify a potential target. Research has also shown that certain factors, including body temperature, pregnancy, and even alcohol consumption can subtly increase a person's attractiveness to some mosquito species. This is not an insect wandering aimlessly through the night. It is a highly specialized parasite following a remarkably precise biological navigation system, which makes the obvious question almost impossible to ignore. If mosquitoes have caused more suffering than almost any other animal on Earth, why wouldn't we eliminate them? For many years, the answer seemed straightforward. Because nature, we were told, could never afford to lose them. But the evidence behind that assumption turns out to be far more complicated than most people realize. The next question isn't whether mosquitoes are dangerous. It's whether the world actually needs them. For decades, one argument has dominated almost every discussion about mosquito eradication. You can't remove a species without consequences. It's an idea so deeply rooted in modern ecology that it almost feels like common sense. Every organism, no matter how small, occupies a niche. Remove one piece, and the entire system could begin to unravel. At least, that's the theory. But theories become interesting only when they're tested against reality. To find where mosquitoes seem most indispensable, we have to travel thousands of miles north, to one of the harshest environments on Earth. Every summer, as the Arctic briefly thaws, something extraordinary happens. Millions upon millions of mosquito eggs hatch almost simultaneously. The result isn't a swarm, it's a living cloud. In some regions, the air becomes so dense with mosquitoes that they appear as dark columns stretching across the tundra. Caribou herds, some numbering in the hundreds of thousands, are forced to flee almost continuously. They abandon nutrient-rich feeding grounds, climb into colder windswept areas, or alter migration routes that have existed for generations, all to escape relentless blood loss. Scientists have even documented measurable declines in feeding time and body weight during severe mosquito seasons. For a moment, it seems like the nightmare scenario is real. If mosquitoes disappeared, wouldn't the entire Arctic ecosystem change? The answer is yes, but probably not in the way most people imagine. Caribou would likely spend more time grazing in productive valleys instead of constantly escaping insects. Their migration patterns could shift, and some vegetation would almost certainly respond over time. In other words, the ecosystem would change. But change is not the same thing as collapse. Nature has never been a frozen machine. It has always been a moving target. The same pattern appears beneath the surface of countless ponds and wetlands around the world. Long before mosquitoes ever learned to fly, they begin life underwater. Mosquito larvae spend their early days filtering microscopic algae, bacteria, and decomposing organic material from stagnant pools. In enormous numbers, they help recycle nutrients through freshwater ecosystems while providing food for fish, aquatic insects, amphibians, and countless other organisms. At first glance, that sounds irreplaceable, but ecology rarely depends on a single player. Remove mosquito larvae, and those nutrients don't suddenly disappear. Neither do the predators. Instead, something familiar happens. Another species moves in. Freshwater ecosystems are crowded with organisms performing remarkably similar jobs. Midges, non-biting flies, phantom midge larvae, and dozens of other aquatic insects compete for nearly identical resources. When one population declines, others often expand to occupy the newly available space. Ecologists call this functional redundancy, the idea that multiple species can perform similar ecological roles. It's one of the reasons ecosystems are often more resilient than they first appear. But perhaps the most persistent warning concerns the animals above the water rather than below it. You've probably heard it before. If mosquitoes disappear, bats will starve. It's an argument repeated in documentaries, classrooms, newspaper articles, and social media posts for decades. It also turns out to be an oversimplification. Most bats are opportunistic hunters. Rather than specializing in mosquitoes, they feed on whatever insects provide the greatest nutritional return for the least effort. Moths, beetles, flies, caddisflies, termites, and countless other insects usually make up the overwhelming majority of their diet. Mosquitoes are certainly eaten, but for many bat species, they represent only a small fraction of total food intake. To a bat, chasing hundreds of tiny mosquitoes is often less efficient than catching a handful of much larger insects. If mosquito numbers decline dramatically, bats wouldn't simply stop eating. They would do what they have always done throughout evolution: adapt. The same pattern appears in fish, frogs, dragonflies, and birds. Most are generalists. They hunt abundance, not loyalty. Which means removing mosquitoes doesn't necessarily remove food. it changes the menu. Even one of the internet's favorite ecological horror stories begins to unravel under closer inspection. You've probably seen the claim that without mosquitoes, chocolate would disappear forever. It's a memorable story. It's also largely incorrect. Cacao trees do rely on tiny insects for pollination, but the primary pollinators are biting midges, not mosquitoes. Although mosquitoes may occasionally visit flowers for nectar, there is little evidence that global cacao production depends on them in any meaningful way. One by one, the familiar disaster scenarios begin to weaken. The bats don't starve. Chocolate doesn't vanish. The food web doesn't suddenly collapse, which raises an uncomfortable possibility. What if we've been asking the wrong question all along? Maybe the real issue isn't whether mosquitoes are important. Maybe it's which mosquitoes we're talking about. Because the insect we casually call the mosquito is not one species, it's thousands. The phrase "eliminate mosquitoes" sounds simple. In reality, it's scientifically meaningless. There isn't one mosquito. There are more than 3,500 known species spread across every continent except Antarctica. They vary enormously in behavior, habitat, and diet. Some spend their lives feeding almost exclusively on amphibians. Others prefer birds, reptiles, or large mammals. Many rarely, if ever, come into contact with humans. In fact, most mosquitoes are completely innocent bystanders in humanity's war against disease. Only a relatively small fraction regularly bite humans, and an even smaller group is responsible for transmitting the pathogens that make mosquitoes so deadly. The vast majority of malaria cases are spread by certain Anopheles mosquitoes. Dengue, Zika, yellow fever, and chikungunya are transmitted primarily by a handful of Aedes species, especially Aedes aegypti, a mosquito so closely associated with human settlements that scientists sometimes describe it as one of humanity's oldest unwanted companions. That distinction changes everything, because suddenly, the debate is no longer about erasing 3,500 species. It's about whether eliminating a few of the most dangerous disease vectors could save millions of lives while leaving the rest of the mosquito family and the ecosystems they inhabit largely intact. It's a far more targeted question, and for decades, scientists searched for a way to answer it. Their first attempts were blunt. During the mid-20th century, many countries declared chemical war on mosquitoes using powerful insecticides such as DDT. At first, the results seemed extraordinary. Mosquito populations crashed, and malaria rates dropped dramatically in several regions. But the victory didn't last. Mosquitoes evolved resistance. Other insects died alongside them. Bird populations declined. Entire ecosystems were exposed to chemicals that remained in the environment long after the spraying stopped. The lesson became painfully clear. A weapon powerful enough to kill mosquitoes indiscriminately was also powerful enough to damage everything around them. So researchers began searching for something entirely different. Not a poison, a genetic instruction. That search eventually led to one of the most revolutionary technologies in modern biology, CRISPR. Often described as a form of molecular gene editing, CRISPR allows scientists to modify DNA with a level of precision that would have seemed impossible only a few decades ago. Instead of attacking adult mosquitoes with chemicals, researchers could potentially alter the genetic instructions passed from one generation to the next. One particularly powerful concept is known as a gene drive. Under normal circumstances, an organism has roughly a 50% chance of passing a particular gene to its offspring. A gene drive changes those odds dramatically. Instead of being inherited only half the time, an engineered genetic trait can spread through a population at an unusually high rate, allowing it to propagate far more quickly than natural inheritance alone would permit. In theory, this means a carefully designed genetic change could spread through a target mosquito population over successive generations, eventually causing that population to shrink dramatically, or even disappear. And this isn't just a thought experiment. Scientists have already conducted field trials using genetically modified mosquitoes in several countries. One well-known approach, developed by companies such as Oxitec, involves releasing modified male mosquitoes. That detail matters. Male mosquitoes do not bite humans. They feed on nectar, making them harmless from a public health perspective. When these engineered males mate with wild females, many of their offspring fail to survive to adulthood, reducing local mosquito populations over time. These field trials are not the same thing as self-propagating gene drives, but they demonstrate something equally important. Mosquito populations can, in principle, be controlled through genetics rather than widespread chemical spraying. It represents a fundamental shift in strategy. Instead of poisoning an ecosystem, scientists attempt to rewrite one small piece of it. Supporters argue that this approach is dramatically more selective than traditional insecticides. Because each target species carries its own unique genetic blueprint, any future gene drive system would be designed to affect only that particular species, leaving bees, butterflies, dragonflies, and thousands of unrelated insects untouched. At least that's the goal. Whether it can be achieved safely outside carefully monitored research remains one of the most intensely debated questions in modern biology. Because once a self-propagating genetic change is released into nature, calling it back may be impossible. And that realization transforms the conversation once again. This is no longer just a discussion about mosquitoes. It's about whether humanity is ready to deliberately rewrite evolution itself. The technology is advancing faster every year. The science is becoming increasingly plausible. But the greatest challenge may have nothing to do with biology at all. It has to do with something far more difficult. Who gets to decide when a species has reached the end of its story? By this point, the scientific question seems surprisingly straightforward. If only a handful of mosquito species are responsible for nearly all mosquito-borne disease, if most predators can switch to other insects, if ecosystems appear capable of filling the vacant ecological niche, and if genetic technologies continue becoming more precise, then why hasn't the world already acted? At first, the answer seems frustratingly simple. Perhaps we just need more research, more field trials, better technology. But as scientists have spent the last 2 decades refining these tools, many have realized that the greatest barrier no longer lies inside the laboratory. It lies inside ourselves. Because this debate has quietly stopped being about mosquitoes, it has become a debate about power. For nearly 4 billion years, evolution has followed its own rules. Species appeared. Species disappeared. Ice ages, volcanic eruptions, asteroid impacts, competition, and natural selection determined which organisms survived and which vanished forever. Humans influenced that process, of course. We hunted species to extinction. We destroyed habitats. We introduced invasive animals that devastated ecosystems. But those were consequences of our actions, not deliberate decisions to erase a species through its own DNA. Genetic engineering changes that distinction completely. For the first time in Earth's history, one species possesses the ability to intentionally rewrite the evolutionary future of another, not by accident, not through pollution, not by overhunting, but by designing a biological instruction that could spread from generation to generation until the target population simply disappeared. That possibility forces scientists to confront questions with no clear scientific answer. If humanity chooses to eliminate Aedes aegypti because it spreads deadly diseases, what happens when another species becomes economically inconvenient? What about agricultural pests that destroy crops? Ticks carrying Lyme disease? Rodents that contaminate food supplies? Invasive species threatening fragile island ecosystems? Each case may appear reasonable when considered alone, but together they reveal something far more profound. Where does the line actually exist? And more importantly, who gets to draw it? A government? An international organization? The country suffering the disease? The country where the species naturally lives? Or the scientists who developed the technology in the first place? None of these questions can be answered by genetics. They belong to ethics. That is why many researchers urge caution, not because they necessarily believe targeted mosquito eradication would trigger ecological catastrophe, but because every successful use of such technology establishes a precedent. History offers a sobering lesson. Nearly every transformative technology has eventually been used in ways its inventors never imagined. Nuclear fission gave humanity clean electricity and nuclear weapons. Artificial intelligence promises extraordinary advances in medicine, science, and education, but also raises difficult questions about misinformation, surveillance, and autonomy. Gene editing may become another technology with enormous benefits, or another whose consequences extend far beyond its original purpose. Some scientists argue that refusing to use these tools also carries an ethical cost. Every year that passes without better mosquito control means hundreds of thousands of preventable deaths continue to occur, many of them among young children, in some of the world's poorest communities. From that perspective, choosing not to act is also a moral decision. Others respond that altering wild populations through self-propagating genetic systems could introduce risks that remain impossible to fully predict. Both sides are trying to protect human life. They simply disagree about which risks deserve the greatest weight. And perhaps that's the most surprising discovery of all. The debate was never really about whether mosquitoes deserve to survive. It's about whether humanity is ready to accept the responsibility that comes with deciding. Because once we prove that we can intentionally erase one species, the next decision may not be nearly as obvious. Imagine waking up 50 years from now. A child walks outside on a warm summer evening. They've never heard the familiar whine circling their ears before bedtime. They've never slept beneath a mosquito net. They've never watched a family member battle malaria. To them, mosquitoes exist only in museums, biology textbooks, and old documentaries describing a world that no longer exists. For billions of people, that future would feel nothing short of miraculous. Hundreds of thousands of lives could be saved every year. Entire healthcare systems in some of the world's poorest nations could redirect resources toward diseases that once received little attention. Children could grow up without one of humanity's oldest and deadliest enemies, shaping their lives before they were even born. It is an extraordinary vision, but it is also an uncomfortable one. Because if that future ever arrives, history may remember it for a reason far greater than the disappearance of mosquitoes. It may remember it as the moment humanity crossed an invisible threshold. For nearly 4 billion years, evolution has written the story of life without intention. Species emerged, species adapted, species vanished. The process was indifferent, blind, and unimaginably slow. Then one species learned to edit the script, not through chance, not through survival, but through choice. Perhaps that power will become one of humanity's greatest achievements, used carefully, transparently, and only to relieve immense suffering. Or perhaps future generations will look back on this moment and see the beginning of an era in which humans believed they understood nature better than nature understood itself. Today, we don't yet know which future awaits us. The science continues to evolve. The technology grows more sophisticated each year. The ethical debate is far from settled. But one thing is already certain. The question is no longer whether humans can alter the fate of another species. That question has, in many ways, already been answered. The real question is whether we possess the wisdom to decide when we should. Because the first species we deliberately erase will almost certainly not be the last. And history has a habit of reminding us that our greatest breakthroughs are rarely defined by what they make possible. They are defined by the choices we make after possibility becomes reality. So perhaps the future of mosquitoes isn't the most important mystery after all. Perhaps the real mystery is what kind of species we choose to become. What do you think? Should humanity eliminate disease-carrying mosquitoes? Leave your answer in the comments, and if you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like and share. Thanks for watching.